Hey guys, welcome to this episode of the podcast. Of course, I'm Scott Royal Smith with Royal Legal Solutions. I have the unique pleasure of introducing you guys to Doug Lodmell from Lodmell Lodmell. You guys are probably, if you're looking at asset protection with Royal Legal, and you're at the right kind of net worth and the right kind of situation, we probably actually referred you over to Lodmell to talk about some of the extra offshore and even bridge trust options. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second of what those are and what they would be. So I just want to say thank you to Doug for joining us here today. And if Doug, if you would just give us like a quick piece about like who you are, how did you come into working with the both real estate investors and what's powerful about how you're helping people?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Great to be here. So asset protection is something that really kind of naturally evolved. My father was actually a real estate syndicator. So he's an attorney, but in the 80s, he did real estate syndications. So he was very familiar with that. And all of you who are old enough remember 1986, there was this S&L crisis, particularly in Arizona where he was based. And it caused a lot of his clients to have financial trouble. And what happened is that these real estate syndications were set up as limited partnerships. And the creditors turned out they couldn't get into the limited partnership interest of all these investors. So as a very clever attorney, my father looked at that and said, that was brilliant. Why don't we just set up asset protection very specifically? And so, he kind of was one of the forerunners in the field of asset protection. One of the first attorneys in the country to start using offshore trusts. And then I joined him in 1997 after going to law school and doing my LL.M in taxation at NYU. And together we created really the smoothest, most seamless asset protection structure we could come up with that used both the domestic tools, the ones that work great here, and the offshore tools, but in a way that was as simple as possible. So that's the really quick history. How I work with clients is, we look at every client individually. We say, okay, what do you need? What are your risk factors? What are your assets? And what are your personal risk tolerance levels? This last one is really interesting because I have clients that have massive amount of assets, lots and lots of risk. I mean, heads of public companies, but their risk profile, their risk tolerance personally is so high that asset protection, they're only semi-motivated. I have other clients that have really modest levels of assets and modest levels of risk that are absolutely motivated because their risk tolerance is very low. So what I find is looking at all three and just respecting where the client is at and trying to find out what fits for them, and helping them understand their options and then letting them choose. Say, yeah, this is what works for me. This is how much protection that I need and I'm comfortable with. My philosophy is, educate. That's how I like to be treated. When I go to the dentist and he says, yeah, you got 3 teeth that need crowns, in the next 10 years, that is just an invitation for me to say, okay, I need to know a lot more about teeth and crowns and, what's the long-term and what kind of material. So it's just an invitation to research. I find that if you give clients the data and you let them come to their own decision, they make good decisions about their own life. It may not be the same as the other guy's decision, but it's going to be the right one for them. Getting good information is our primary objective. Getting you good information so that you can make a good decision about how to protect your own assets.
Where does that come in? Because that's a question we get like a lot, right? And is about like, hey, when do I need my first LLC or when do I need XYZ piece, right? And that's typically, I think the general response is like, it really depends, right? It depends
Right.
on what you need it for. And a lot of that comes, I think, exactly what you just hit with like, what's your risk tolerance? And sometimes when I ask people, I'm like, well, what's your risk tolerance? And they're like, I don't know. I don't know what my risk tolerance is into it. So is that something you counsel people on too? It's like, how do you discover like what your personal risk tolerance is? Because otherwise I kind of feel like people don't know. So they're like, hey, do I just want to spend the money or not? And it comes into
Right.
this very unsophisticated way of decision making.
Right. So if you don't know your risk tolerance, then you need to assume that it's low. Because if you haven't pressed yourself and you figured out what it is, then you need to assume that it's going to be low. It's just like saying to somebody, you take them to Vegas for the first time and you say, well, how much are you comfortable losing at the blackjack table? And they say, I don't know, I've never played before. And you're saying, okay, great, well, pull out $10,000. you'll find out real quick if their risk tolerance is $10,000 or if it's less, right? And if they say, well, could I lose all of this? And you say, absolutely, you could lose all of it. Well, I wouldn't be comfortable with that. Okay, well, how much would you be comfortable pulling out and losing right now? $100. Okay, great. That's your risk tolerance. So yeah, it is something. It's not so much a counseling. It's really a discovering. And there are also some basics that I don't really care how high your risk tolerance is. There's just some things you need to do. It's good fundamental planning. So if you're buying a rental property, it needs to go in an LLC. I mean, every rental property. So if it's your first rental property, and it's only going to be a $60,000 house, it should still go in an LLC. So there's some basic fundamentals that we really, really encourage. If you're somebody who just wants to absolutely spend zero money on planning and just, then that's not a good candidate for any kind of a planning attorney, because they have the idea that they're just not going to spend money on planning. But if you have the basics of saying, hey, look, I want to get the fundamentals right, then yeah, we just look at that and we help educate on, okay, if you're going to be in the business of real estate, then you need to use LLCs. How you use them, we'll educate you on. How many do you need? Can you put 5 properties in one LLC, or should it just be 1 property? And we talk about that and talk about, that's where risk tolerance is a good number. I say when someone says I have 10 properties and the total equity between the 10 properties is $1.5 million. I say, great. And they say, how many LLCs do I need? Somebody told me I need 10. And I said, well, 10 would be 1 for each property. That'd be fine, but that's a lot to manage. Somebody else told me I just need 1. Okay, well, that's a lot into one basket. What I say is, well, how much would you feel comfortable exposing to any one risk inside of any one basket out of your 1.5 million? And it's usually somewhere around $250,000 to $300,000 or $400,000, right? And say, okay, great. So if we broke it up into $400,000 tranches, your 1.5 million, let's call it 4 LLCs. So that's where the risk tolerance conversation comes in. It's just helping them understand how to maximize the protection, but not overkill on the amount of maintenance that they're going to have to do.
And is that like a typical piece that you find as part of the analysis, or an important part of the analysis that people are going through, is around what the time costs are to manage the entities, what the yearly fees are going to be? Or is it really much more persuasive to just look at, here's the total amount of money that we should look at protecting in any one particular tranche, and that the other part's kind of like getting lost in the weeds, of like, oh, it's going to be extra $50 or $100 each year or something.
Yeah. So that's a great question. When you're talking about LLCs, because we can do either series LLCs or single member LLCs held by a holding company, the extra cost for doing an additional LLC is minimal. So yeah, I would say you're getting lost in the weeds if you're trying to, absolutely minimize the LLCs in that example. It's more important to look at the assets. Then again, if you have a group of assets that are fairly low risk and they're well insured, you don't need a separate LLC for each $100,000 rental home that you have. Why bother? Because even if the costs are minimal and there's no separate tax return for each LLC, when you look up one day and you have 100 LLCs, well, it might have been overkill, right? So it's just finding that balance.
And when you look at people that are trying to decide between the balance, when they're going, hey, first I'm going to start with domestic maybe, and maybe I just start with a single LLC, and then I've grown that over time. And now I'm starting to figure out okay, what's the next pieces that I want to do, right? And I think that's where I think that people start looking at, trust structures like domestic asset protection trusts, or foreign trusts, or maybe even the work that you guys specialize in with the bridge trust.
Yeah.
What seems to be the right timing? What's the right analysis to know, hey, I've been building the domestic side and I really need to start considering these other more advanced, more costly options?
Yeah, that's a great question. So clearly domestic is the first part you build, right? So your LLCs, once you've got, enough value in assets, whether it's in one LLC or multiple, you really should look at a holding company. The holding company concept is just very powerful because it gets things consolidated. And from a tax perspective, it consolidates your tax reporting. That's where people get really hung up. Too many tax returns. You'll even see CPAs, which is counterintuitive if they're running a business, right? So the CPA will often tell a client, you got too many tax returns. I don't like doing all your tax returns, even though they're charging for each tax return. They don't like to do more than necessary. And so the LLC with the holding company is kind of part A to the whole thing. You should start looking at a trust somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million worth of net equity. In other words, exposed equity value. Once we get to $1 million, I really think you should be looking at some type of asset protection trust on top of the holding company and the underlying LLCs. Beyond $1 million, I pretty much will decline to take a client for just part of it, especially if they're $2 or $3 million of total assets and they just want to do an LLC and a holding company. Often I'll say no. I just don't feel comfortable because it's not enough. It's not enough protection. And I really want them, or I'll do it with the very clear caveat that, hey, this is not my recommendation. You really need to have the trust on top of this. Because the domestic structures, as good as they are, they're domestic and they're still subject to the U.S. courts and the discretion of a judge. And if you have been around long enough, you'll have seen crazy judgments, crazy judges that are results oriented. They just want to get a particular result and they justify it however they want. When you're dealing with someone's entire life's work, messing that up and having them lose their money, that's not something that I think you want to be the attorney on. And so I'm very careful, and I do encourage strongly that once they're above that $1 million mark of protectable money, equity, not total market value, but equity after the mortgages have been deducted and after we're really looking at what the asset values are worth, you really should be looking at the whole thing.
Yeah, I think that's well put. You have to start looking at what's the both like what's the total amount of assets. And for most people, if it's their entire life work, you're really talking about maybe 15, 10, 15 years of their life that's gone in to build that,
Yeah.
right? So it's like you don't get an extra 10 or 15 years if you lose that. Like you just get to restart at like whatever level you're at, right? And I think that's really the biggest risk for me. It's like, I'll have that conversation with people. It's like, well, how long did it take you to make this money? If it takes you a month, then maybe don't set up anything.
Right.
If it takes you 15 years, what's the cost of 15 years of your life back? Like that's a big piece, to consider with that. And one of the struggles I think that we get, we're talking with asset protection in particular, right, is that it's like building a house, right? Like it doesn't cost you a ton to maintain a house, but there's a large cost to build the house itself, right? And so some people are like, oh, well, I only got $250,000, or $500,000 in real estate here, and you want me to spend 5, 10, $25,000, $30,000, depending on the scope of like what's getting put in place, right? And so people will get like sticker shock of like, oh wow, I don't know if I should spend that much money to it. What's your typical thought process to help people think through like how they're strategically spending money in asset protection to see like the value in that expenditure? Because really it goes into documents. That's not an asset that's producing anything for them, right? So it's a different kind of investment, from a risk that maybe people don't really understand. So what are the things when you get those kinds of comments back from people, what are the things that you typically tell them?
Yeah, so it's a really great point, right? Because you're spending money on some paper that somebody told you need, and then it costs you even more money to maintain because now your accountant has to file more paper for the paper that you created, and you're going, well, what do I really need all this stuff? The answer is that's where the risk tolerance comes in. I had one guy call me. He's from California. He's like 60 years old. He'd been doing real estate his entire life, and the way he started was just buying them in his own name. And now, 40 years of doing that, I mean, he had tens and tens of millions of dollars of real estate in California, all in his own name. And we looked at it, and the cost of converting it over at that point was so prohibitive that he could afford to write checks for major lawsuits for the amount of money it would cost him to make the conversion. So, and he'd been living his whole life and he hadn't worried about it, right? So it didn't affect him. He did it that way because he didn't know any better. Today, that would be insane to start like that, to just say, oh, I'm just going to do it that way, because you're effectively risking your entire net worth and hoping that you don't have a bad day, right? That you don't have a bad lawsuit. So what I focus on is, what does it cost you to worry about this? And once you understand the risk that you're taking, and frankly, most people do understand the risk they're taking. That's the part that they do understand. They get that. They understand this type of society we live in, the litigious nature of the society, the fact that lawyers are out there trolling for clients, that billboards and ads on TV and your tenants are being trolled all the time for all sorts of lawsuit opportunities. Then the cost of you worrying about it is more than the cost of setting it up and maintaining it. And once I help clients understand that, they usually go, yeah, that's right. I do spend some time. And what I've found, Scott, is there's a tipping point. If you don't have any money, you don't spend any time worrying about how to protect it. I don't have any money. I got student debt. I got no money. I don't worry about protecting it. And then you buy your first house. You're still not worried because you're in your old mindset. Then you buy your second fix and flip, and you ended up, oh, I'm going to keep that as a rental. It's a good one. And next thing you know, you look up, it's 10 years later, and you've got $2 million worth of properties, and you're married, and you have 2 kids, and all of a sudden it kind of hits you, oh my God, I have something worth protecting. And there's just this tipping point internally that I see people go through, where they all of a sudden just go, wow, I'm worried about protecting what I have. And so it's really about finding that tipping point for each person. I will tell you, there's kind of common threads. Once you wake up and you've had nothing but debt and zero for your whole life, and you look up and you're like, oh my God, I have $500,000. That's kind of a tipping point, right? You start to go, I should probably be doing something about this. And so, it's just a natural thing to start wanting to protect once you realize you have something to protect.
Yeah, such a good point too, because there's a piece to this, I think, that always goes into what's a best practice, right? And I think we touched on that a little bit before, right? Where it's like, if you have one property, cool, goes into an LLC. I don't care, right? Because that's a best practice, and it doesn't matter about the cost. It doesn't matter anything else. It's the right way to do business. You need to learn the right ways of doing business from the very beginning, because that's the way rich people do, right? Rich people find systems, processes, say, that's my process, and I run it so I can focus all of my time and energy on the one thing that the system and process can't do for me, which is the new opportunity. Where do I actually go and create something in the world? And I think this is also really true in terms of what you're talking about right now, right? Which is, no, there's actually this other cost, which is, how much are you worried about this thing? Right. And then, like, that actually pulls the energy that you have, the psychic energy, the energy of your mind out, which is keeping you from making more money. Or keeping you from doing what the thing are, right? So they're real costs. They're just not costs you can see, because they're not in front of your face. It's not a number that you can track very easily. Or maybe you could track it, but it would take some extra awareness and intentionality, wouldn't it?
And they are very real costs. And I can prove it to you. If you've ever helped a client go through a divorce, I can guarantee you that when the divorce is contested and when they're arguing about the value of the business, the business always suffers. It just tanks, because the client is more worried about not making the business more valuable, about getting this divorce finished, and a divorce, it could also just be a lawsuit. It could be anything, but divorces are lawsuits. So they're just traumatic lawsuits with lots of emotion. And it's just, every time you will tank your business in the middle of a divorce, so that, because you can't focus on it. And then as soon as the divorce is over, the business usually skyrockets up, because your attention goes back to it and your focus, and you want it to grow. When you're worried about losing your money, you cannot make as much money. It's just, give a kid a piggy bank and teach him to put money in it, and he will look for money. He will save it, and he will go in there and put the piggy bank. Give the kid, money, and don't train him to do that, and he has no awareness, and he won't learn to save, and he won't ever focus their attention there. So you're right, Scott. It's best practice. It's setting up the right structure from day one and teaching the clients how to use it so that they can just forget about it. It doesn't become something they worry about later on.
Yeah, absolutely. And you might want to do is give that kid like a piggy bank, and then give him an older brother that's going to steal the money out of the piggy bank unless he watches it.
See what happens,
about
right?
What lawsuits are, right? And then you're like, I got to watch this piggy bank.
Yeah, right.
I was like, that sounds like my 2 older brothers, And I was like, where's that ice cream money? I was like, you guys never going to find my piggy bank. Yeah.
No,
Yeah, I
it's
got
hidden, well hidden, asset protected.
yeah, for sure. In the bottom of my closet underneath all the clothes. That
Yep,
was my first experience in asset protection when I was 6. Was how
exactly.
to That's awesome, man. So awesome, Doug. I was wondering, is there anything else that we should have covered today for people to get to know you, the way you think about asset protection, why it's important to do it that we haven't touched on?
Well, I mean, there's so much really, but uh, the easiest thing I think to remember is that um, getting good information is key. And what experts can do for you is they can filter out and give you the nuggets. They can give you the essence of the good information. Um, Information nowadays is free. Internet is full of it. It's absolutely free. But to get it distilled and curated down to information that's valuable to you, that's where experts come in. So use your experts. The most successful people I know have literally a team of experts around them. They rely heavily on those experts, and they make sure that they really are experts. They're the people that know how to advise them. So, what we do, what you do, what I do for our clients is we do that. We distill that information. We give you what you need to know without you having to go to law school and do the research and keep up with all the journals and constantly read the cases. That's our job. So if we can be helpful in that, then we're doing our job. And believe me, it is more than worthwhile for you. I once had a pilot tell me, they don't pay me to fly the VIP of these companies for the 2-hour flight that it is. They don't pay me $250,000 a year to fly that jet for that 2-hour flight. They pay me for the 20,000 hours that I've already flown, because that makes me a safe pilot. I know how to handle the emergencies. It's the same with your experts. You're not paying for the piece of paper. You can get that piece of paper online at LegalZoom or something else for virtually free. You're paying for the expertise to know if you, one, need that piece of paper and how to use it, and particularly if you have to use it to protect your assets, how you're going to actually use it to protect your assets. So
Yeah,
hopefully
well
that's
said.
helpful.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful, Doug. And what's the best resources for people to look at for you? I know that like Lodmell has like an awesome collection of resources on the website. Is that the best way for them to get more information about what you do with the bridge trust and the offshore trust, and for them to contact you if they want to reach out?
Yeah, so my website is great. There's just a ton of information on there, a bunch of videos, and that's just lodmell.com, LODMELL.com. I did just recently, Scott, write a paper. So I have the key concepts of asset protection. It's one of the things that I've done for a lot of years, and I have a good series of videos that really talks about the key concepts, how using a trust and jurisdiction and irrevocability, all these things, and it builds step by step. So I recently wrote a paper called The Key Concepts of Protecting Real Estate, because I realized a lot of people are having difficulty translating those key concepts into, well, but real estate is different. So if you want that, it's not posted online. It's something I can email to you. So you can email me directly. My email is just my name, Doug@lodmell.com, and I'll send you that Key Concepts of Protecting Real Estate. I can also send it to you, and if you want to make it available to them directly, you're welcome to do that, Scott.
Yeah, send it over to me too, and we'll
Okay.
post it into the Facebook group too, so that way
Oh,
like
that'd be great.
everybody like inside of a resource. Facebook allows you to have those resource sections. So we're
Oh, yeah.
taking all the PDFs that we're doing. Like we are just launching now, like our COVID financial protection plan, which
Yep.
has like my top 10 strategies, tactics, and thought processes that I use for navigating like unknown risks
Yeah.
into that. So we're having that hosted in there. We'll host yours in there too. But
Okay.
everybody
Perfect.
listen to this. If you want to get it directly from Doug and just reach out to him, it's just Doug@lodmell.com. I've known Doug for a long time. Fantastic guy, just through and through. From what he does, really knows his stuff. We've been down in Geneva at conventions with like all the top asset protection and tax people in the world with out there, guys. So I'm really happy to introduce you to him and to his firm because it's just another top quality type of contact for you guys. And he's, as we said before, like he's not just asset protection, right? He also has LL.M and tax, very experienced in the field of anything that you have coming up with. He's also pretty generous with your time, as long as you're somebody there that's like serious about, real problems, like what are the real problems that are sophisticated problems that you need somebody that's at Doug's level to talk to help you navigate that. So don't ever feel shy about reaching out to him, at least
Yeah,
by
please.
email, and get him at Doug@Lodmell.com. Otherwise, drop a comment here if you have any questions about any of the work that Doug does or any questions for him. We'll make sure that he gets those questions as part of the Facebook group. and then he gets in here. So thank you so much, Doug, for coming on to our show here today, and we'll be in touch with you whenever we get this video posted.
Okay, my pleasure. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, bud.